I remember the day it began as fragments of glass, reflecting moments that no longer fit together. The pain came first, sharp and burrowing at the base of my skull where the vertebrae meet bone, then the taste of iron flooding my mouth, not blood, something older, something colder. Like licking the hull of a void ship that had traversed the places between stars. I was Arvin Creel then, dockworker, lifter of crates, counter of rivets. A man of no consequence on a world of diminishing importance. Forge World Helios Secundus, once proud producer of Chimera transports and Basilisk artillery, now reduced to manufacturing replacement parts and low-grade munitions. The Forge temples still belched their black smoke into the perpetual twilight, but the priests of the machine god spoke in hushed, worried tones. Production quotas, resource allocation, efficiency protocols, words that meant hunger was coming. The underhive where I lived was called the Sump by some, the Dregs by others. Names didn't matter there, only survival did. I remember the walk home that night through maintenance tunnels slick with condensation, the distant clank of machinery never ceasing, never sleeping. The air tasted of promethium and rust. My muscles ached from 14 hours of loading ammunition crates onto cargo haulers, bound for war zones whose names we were not permitted to know. The attack came without warning. I heard nothing, saw nothing. Just the sudden pressure of something wet against my neck, then pain unlike anything I had known before. My memories fracture there, becoming unreliable. I recall falling, the cold metal grating against my cheek. I recall a shape, something that should not exist in the rational world of the Omnissiah, moving with terrible purpose. I recall chitin and claw and too many limbs, moving with the horrible grace of a predator that has already won. Then nothing but fever dreams for what might have been days. When I awoke in my HAB unit, I convinced myself it had been an illness, perhaps the toxic miasma that sometimes leaked from the underhive chemical sumps. The wound at the back of my neck had already healed, leaving only a small, hard knot of scar tissue. I should have reported to a medicae. I should have sought the ministrations of the machine cult's biologists. I did neither. The Forge world punishes weakness, and I could not afford to miss labor shifts. The changes were subtle at first. Food tasted wrong, flat, dead. I found myself staring at shadows, convinced they moved when no one was watching. My dreams became vivid, filled with visions of vast, hollow spaces and the sensation of falling upward into an endless void. I would wake with my sheets soaked in sweat, my jaw aching from grinding my teeth. Work became difficult. The noise of the manufactorum, once merely unpleasant, became unbearable. Each clang of metal on metal sent lances of pain through my skull. The foreman noticed my distraction, my diminished productivity. 2 warning marks in a single week. A third would mean reduction to half rations. I could not allow that. Then came the first blackout. I was walking home, taking my usual route through the maintenance tunnels. Then suddenly I was somewhere else, standing in a section of the underhive I did not recognize. My hands were wet. My mouth tasted of copper and salt. 3 hours had vanished, swallowed by a darkness in my mind that I dared not probe. Just exhaustion, I told myself, the words echoing hollowly in the empty tunnel, just the fatigue toxins building up. But I knew it was a lie even as I spoke it. Something had been done to me in that attack. Something had been put inside me, gestating, growing, changing me cell by cell. In the privacy of my filthy HAB unit, I finally examined myself properly. My skin had developed a strange pallor, almost gray in the weak lumens. The veins at my wrists seemed darker, more pronounced, and when I opened my mouth before the cracked mirror, I saw that my canine teeth had lengthened, just slightly, just enough to notice. The worst was the hunger. Not for the protein gruel and synthetic carb wafers that composed our standard rations. No, this was a hunger with no name, a craving for something I could not identify. It gnawed at me from the inside, a parasite demanding to be fed. I began to hear whispers, not with my ears, but inside my skull. Wordless communications, emotions without language. Hunger. anticipation, purpose. I would find myself standing motionless for minutes, head tilted as though listening to a distant conversation, before snapping back to awareness. The blackouts increased in frequency, an hour missing here, 3 hours there. Once, an entire day vanished, and I returned to consciousness in the deepest reaches of the Underhive, in tunnels abandoned even by the most desperate of the Forge World's inhabitants. My clothing was torn. There was dried blood under my fingernails. I didn't dare question whose it might be. I should have ended it then. A plasma conduit, improperly handled, would have been quick. Or I could have requested assignment to the most toxic areas of the chemical sumps, where life expectancy was measured in weeks. The rational part of me, the human part that remained, knew that something terrible was happening, that I was becoming a vessel for something other. But there was another part now, growing stronger each day, that would not allow such thoughts of self-destruction. It whispered of patience, of purpose, of the glory that would come when the stars changed and the great devourer arrived to consume all. I first saw one of my own kind 63 days after the attack. I had taken to wandering the Underhive during my periods of lucidity, drawn by instincts I did not understand toward areas I had never before visited. In a chamber that might once have been a secondary plasma regulation station, now long abandoned, I found them, 3 figures, hunched and malformed, their bodies caught between humanity and something else. One still wore the tattered remnants of a manufactorum uniform. Another had the augmetic arm of a tech serf. The third was further along in its transformation, its skull elongated, its jaw distended to accommodate too many teeth. They did not speak, not with words, but I felt their recognition wash over me like a wave, a psychic acknowledgement of kinship. The human part of me recoiled in horror. The other part felt for the first time a sense of belonging. "What is happening to me?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. The one with the augmetic arm approached. Its movements were jerky, uncoordinated, as though it had not yet fully learned to control its changing body. When it reached for me, I saw that its fingers had begun to fuse, the flesh hardening into something like chitin. "You are awakening," it said, the words slurred around a tongue that was no longer fully human. "You are becoming. You are preparing the way." The way for what? The creature tilted its head, an unsettlingly inhuman gesture. "For those who made us, for the hive that hungers, for the great devourer." I knew the words, though I had never heard them spoken aloud. On a Forge world, certain knowledge is restricted, deemed dangerous to productivity and morale. But rumors spread through the Underhive like toxins through groundwater, whispers of horrors beyond the stars, of worlds consumed, stripped of all life, left as barren husks drifting through the void. Tyranids, the great devourer, the doom that waits between the stars. We were human, I said, desperately clinging to the fading memory of what that meant. "We were alone," the creature corrected. "Now we are part of something greater." The brood mind grows, the beacon strengthens. Soon they will hear our call. I fled then, the human part of me still strong enough to recognize the horror of what awaited. But even as I ran through the twisting tunnels of the Underhive, I felt the others in my mind, their thoughts brushing against mine. Not angry at my rejection. Patient, knowing that the changes within me would continue, that the thing I was becoming would eventually overcome what remained of Arven Creel. I resolved to fight it, to cling to my humanity for as long as possible. I volunteered for additional work shifts, hoping that exhaustion would quiet the whispers in my mind. I took to carrying a small blade, stolen from the manufactorum, promising myself that if the blackouts worsened, if I found more blood on my hands, I would use it on myself before I could be used to harm others. For a time, it seemed to work. The whispers receded to the edges of my consciousness. The blackouts became less frequent. I dared to hope that perhaps the infection, or whatever it was, might be fought off, might be contained. Then came the compliance inspection. Every solar cycle, Agents of the Adeptus Mechanicus would descend from the upper spires to assess productivity and resource allocation throughout the Forge world. These were times of tension and fear, for those deemed inefficient or unnecessary would be repurposed to more hazardous duties, or worse, rendered down for their chemical components in the corpse starch processes. I was at my station, loading crate after crate of bolter shells onto the conveyor, when I felt it, a presence at the edges of my mind, vast and cold and hungry. The tech priests had brought something with them this cycle. Something that could see through human disguises, that could detect the alien taint in human flesh. A servitor sentinel, its body a grotesque fusion of human remains and detection equipment, its eye lenses swiveled independently, scanning the laborers as they worked. I kept my head down, my movements mechanical, trying to project the dull obedience expected of Forge World laborers. But I could feel its sensors lingering on me, analyzing, detecting the subtle wrongness in my biochemistry. The whispers in my mind suddenly intensified, a chorus of alarms spreading through what I now understood was a psychic network connecting me to the others of my kind. The brood mind, awakening to a threat. I felt them stirring from their hiding places throughout the underhive, a simultaneous response to danger. The sentinel approached my station, its augmetic limbs whirring softly. I kept working, even as cold sweat beaded on my forehead. It stopped 3 meters away, its main sensor array focused directly on me. Subject displays anomalous biochemical signatures. It intoned, its Vox grill producing a flat, emotionless declaration. Potential xenocontamination detected. Subject is to be isolated for further examination. 2 security servitors detached from their positions along the wall, moving to flank me. I had seconds before they would restrain me, before I would be taken to the biologist labs for dissection and analysis. Discovery would mean not just my death, but a purge of the entire underhive sector, a cleansing that would kill thousands, including any others who carried the same taint I did. The human part of me, Arven Creel, the dock worker, wanted to surrender, to confess, to warn the Forge world of the infection spreading through its lowest levels. But that part of me was no longer in control. The change came over me with shocking speed. My vision sharpened, colors becoming more vivid, smells more intense. I could hear the whir of servos in the security units, could sense the patterns of their programming. My muscles tensed, suddenly stronger, more responsive, and for the first time I felt the physical changes manifest fully, my fingers elongating into claws, my jaw unhinging slightly to accommodate the teeth that now filled my mouth. I moved without conscious thought, driven by instincts implanted by the thing that had attacked me in the darkness. The first security servitor went down before it could react, my newly formed claws tearing through the interface between its organic components and mechanical parts. The second managed to raise its stun baton, but it was designed to subdue unaugmented humans, not the creature I had become. The Sentinel was more dangerous. It fired a burst from an integrated laser weapon, the beam scorching my shoulder as I twisted away. The pain was distant, unimportant. I leapt, covering the distance between us in a single bound, and tore into its sensor array, ripping away the delicate equipment that had detected my true nature. Only then did I become aware of the screams, the other workers, witnessing my transformation, my violence. Their terror cut through the battle haze, reaching the part of me that was still Arven Creel. I looked down at my hands, now twisted into weapons that no human should possess, and felt a moment of utter horror at what I had become. The klaxons began to wail, security protocols engaging. Bulkheads would be sealing, cutting off escape routes. I ran, moving with a speed and agility I had never before possessed, heading for the maintenance tunnels that would lead me deep into the underhive, away from the light, away from humanity. As I fled, I felt the brood mind stirring fully to wakefulness, the psychic network connecting me to my kin humming with activity. The discovery had forced their hand. The careful, patient infiltration was over. Now would come the uprising, the seizing of key infrastructure, the calling of the beacon that would summon the hive fleet. And I, who had once been Arven Creel, would play my part in the doom of Forge World Helios Secundus. In the deepest reaches of the Underhive, in chambers untouched by human feet for centuries, I found the others gathering, dozens of them in various stages of transformation. Some, like me, still mostly human in appearance despite the changes beneath the skin. Others further along, their humanity almost entirely subsumed by the alien genetic code, rewriting them from within. And a few, the oldest infections, so changed as to be barely recognizable as having once been human at all. At the center of the chamber stood the Patriarch, the first of our kind on this world, the progenitor from whom all infection had spread. It was massive, easily twice the height of a human, its body a horrifying amalgamation of Genestealer and human traits twisted together through generations of careful breeding. 4 arms, each ending in vicious claws, a skull elongated to house the expanded brain that served as the nexus of the broodmind, eyes that held an alien intelligence, ancient and cold and utterly inhuman. I approached with the others, drawn by a compulsion I could not resist. The Patriarch reached out with its primary limbs, gently, almost tenderly placing its claws upon my head, and then the full force of the broodmind crashed into me like a tidal wave. I saw the plan unfolding across decades. The patient infiltration of the Forge World's lower levels, the careful conversion of key personnel, the gradual sabotage of detection systems and security protocols, all to prepare for the day when the Hive fleet would arrive, drawn by the psychic beacon of thousands of infected minds calling out in unison. I saw the fate that awaited humanity on this world. Consumption, absorption, the rendering down of all biomass to feed the eternal hunger of the tyrannid swarm. And I saw my role in this apocalypse, the purpose for which I had been remade. The human part of me recoiled in horror, tried to scream, to fight against the destiny being forced upon me. But that part was growing weaker by the hour, crushed under the weight of the broodmind's will. I was no longer an individual, but a cell in a vast organism, a single note in a symphony of destruction. When the Patriarch released me, I fell to my knees, shaking with the enormity of the vision I had been granted. Around me, others were receiving the same communion, the same revelation of purpose. Some wept, others chittered in alien joy. All accepted. The time of hiding is over, said one of the more advanced hybrids, its voice a rasping approximation of human speech. The Mechanicus knows of our presence now. We must accelerate the timetable. The beacon is not yet at full strength, argued another. The Hive fleet may not detect us if we call too soon. The Patriarch made a sound, a complicated series of clicks and hisses that needed no translation. The decision had been made. The uprising would begin immediately. I was assigned to a strike team tasked with seizing one of the Underhive's primary power distribution nodes. The human engineers there would be either converted or consumed, their biomass used to strengthen the brood. The facility itself would be repurposed, its energy diverted to power the psychic beacon that would call to the Hive fleet. As we moved through the maintenance tunnels toward our objective, I fought a desperate internal battle. The part of me that was still Arven Creel, still human, railed against what I was about to do. Images of the engineers, ordinary men and women no different from who I had been, about to face horror and death at my hands. But the hybrid part, growing stronger with each passing hour, saw only prey, only biomass to be harvested for the brood. We emerged into the power distribution facility through maintenance ducts too small for an unmodified human to navigate. The night shift was minimal, just 4 engineers monitoring the systems. They had no warning. The first died before he could even turn from his monitoring station, my claws severing his spine with surgical precision. The second managed to hit the alarm, but the third member of our strike team had already sabotaged the communication systems. The alarm wailed uselessly, its warning confined to this chamber alone. The third engineer fought back with surprising strength, wielding a heavy wrench as an improvised weapon. For a moment, the human part of me hoped she might escape, might warn others. Then the fourth member of our strike team dropped from the ceiling onto her back, its weight driving her to the floor. I looked away as it began to feed. The final engineer we took alive, as instructed. The female hybrid named Vex, once a Medicae technician before her conversion, restrained him as I approached. He thrashed in her grip, eyes wide with terror as he beheld my partially transformed state. "Emperor, protect me," he whispered, a prayer that would go unanswered. I leaned close, feeling the alien organ at the back of my throat activate, extending outward. The ovipositor, through which the infection would be passed. A kiss, of sorts. The most intimate violation possible. "This will hurt," I said, the human part of me offering this small mercy of warning. "But then you will understand. You will be part of something greater." His screams as the infection began were mercifully brief. With the facility secured and its staff either eliminated or converted, we began the process of reconfiguring the power distribution systems. None of us had been engineers in our human lives, but the knowledge was there in the brood mind, extracted from the minds of those who had been converted before us. We worked with the eerie coordination of insects in a hive, each performing our assigned task without need for verbal communication. As I rerouted power conduits, diverting energy from the manufactorum levels to our hidden nest deep in the underhive, I felt the broodmind's satisfaction washing over me. Similar operations were underway throughout the Forge world's lower levels. Power facilities, water reclamation plants, air circulation systems, all being seized, all being repurposed to support the brood and strengthen the beacon. But I also felt something else, a disturbance in the psychic network that connected us all. Alarm, pain, the sudden silencing of multiple nodes in the brood mind. Some of our kin were dying. The Mechanicus had responded more quickly and more decisively than the Patriarch had anticipated. Skitarii kill teams were descending into the underhive, guided by servitor scouts and tech priest biologies experts who could detect the subtle signs of Genestealer infestation. They moved with the ruthless efficiency for which the Adeptus Mechanicus was known, purging any sector where contamination was detected, regardless of collateral damage to uninfected human workers. I felt the deaths of my broodkin as phantom pains, brief flashes of agony before their connections to the brood mind were severed. The human part of me felt a surge of hope at this development, at the possibility that the infection might be contained, the Forge world saved. The hybrid part felt only alarm and a growing determination to complete our mission before the Skitarii could reach us. We finished the power reconfiguration and received new orders through the broodmind. We were to proceed deeper into the underhive, to the chamber where the Patriarch was overseeing the construction of the beacon. All available broodkin were being called back to defend this most crucial of assets. If the beacon could be activated, even for a brief time, it might be enough to alert the hive fleet to our presence. The Great Devourer would come, and all the forces of the Mechanicus would be as nothing before its hunger. As we moved through the twisting tunnels of the underhive, I found myself hoping that we would encounter a Skitari patrol, that we would be purged before we could reach the beacon, that my death might, in some small way, help to prevent the doom that was coming for this world. But we met no resistance. The Skitarii were methodical in their advance, clearing each sector before moving to the next. We kept ahead of their line of advance, ghosting through areas they had not yet reached. The beacon chamber was a vast space that had once been a secondary plasma reactor, long ago decommissioned and forgotten by the tech priests above. The reactor itself had been gutted, its interior transformed into something that defied human aesthetics or engineering principles. Organic matter, grown or harvested from victims, had been fused with mechanical components stripped from Forge world machinery. The entire structure pulsed with a life of its own, tendrils of some unknown biological material writhing across its surface. At its center stood the Patriarch, its massive form connected to the beacon by umbilical cords of the same organic material that composed the structure. Around it gathered the most advanced of the hybrids, those whose transformations had progressed to the point where they barely resembled humans at all. They swayed in eerie unison, a physical manifestation of the psychic chant, that was already beginning to resonate through the brood mind. We took our places among the outer circles of the gathering, adding our psychic voices to the growing chorus. I felt the power building, the psychic pressure increasing as more and more of our kind joined the chant. The beacon began to pulse more rapidly, its organic components throbbing with increased blood flow, its mechanical parts humming as power surged through them. Then I felt it, a vast and distant consciousness, turning its attention toward our call. Something ancient beyond reckoning, cold as the void between stars, hungry with a hunger that could never be satisfied. The hive mind, the Gestalt consciousness of the Tyranid race, had heard our beacon. A tendril of its awareness reached across the void, touched upon our brood mind, and acknowledged our call. They were coming. The human part of me, what remained of Arven Creel, wanted to scream, to weep, to rage against what we had done. But that part was now a mere whisper, almost completely subsumed by the hybrid nature that had overtaken me. Instead, I felt only satisfaction, a sense of purpose fulfilled. The great devourer would come, and we, its advance guard, would be rewarded with absorption into its perfect being. The chant reached its crescendo, the psychic beacon pulsing with energy that could be felt even by those without psychic sensitivity. The air in the chamber seemed to waver, reality itself disturbed by the power we were channeling. The Patriarch's form shuddered in what might have been ecstasy, its connection to the greater Tyranid consciousness momentarily direct and unfiltered. Then came the response. Not just acknowledgement, but instructions. Data flooding into the brood mind, too complex for my partially transformed consciousness to fully comprehend. The Patriarch absorbed it all, processed it, then relayed simplified versions to the rest of us. I understood enough. The Hive fleet had altered course. It was coming for Forge World Helios Secundus, but it would take time, perhaps as much as a solar year, for even the fastest advance elements to reach us. We would need to survive until then. To continue our infiltration, to weaken the Forge World's defenses from within, to prepare it for consumption. The chant began to wind down, the beacon's pulsing slowing to a more sustainable rhythm. It would continue to call, a constant signal that the Hive fleet could follow across the void. But the intense burst that had initially attracted their attention was over. Now came the long wait. As the gathering began to disperse, each group of hybrids assigned to new tasks by the broodmind, I felt a subtle shift in the psychic network. A new current of emotion, originating from the upper levels of the underhive. Fear, pain. The Skitari had found one of our larger nests, one containing many of the newer converts who had not yet learned to hide their nature effectively. The slaughter was absolute. I felt each death as a small flicker in the broodmind, a candle being snuffed out. The Skitarii showed no mercy, made no attempt to distinguish between the fully transformed and those only recently infected. All were purged with bolt, flame, and blade. "They are more effective than anticipated," said Vex, the Medicae hybrid who had been part of my strike team. Her transformation had accelerated rapidly after the beacon's activation, her lower jaw now distended to accommodate an extra row of needle-like teeth, her eyes taking on the faceted appearance of the purest strain Genestealer. "It will not matter," replied another hybrid, this one so far along that its speech was barely comprehensible through its mutated vocal apparatus. "The call has been made. The great devourer comes. These machines only delay the inevitable." But I could sense the concern rippling through the brood mind. The Skitari were moving more quickly than expected, their purge more thorough. If they maintained this pace, they might reach the beacon chamber before the Hive fleet arrived. All would be for nothing. New orders pulsed through the psychic network. We would need to slow the Skitarii advance. To distract them, to lead them away from the beacon. Sacrifices would be necessary. I was assigned to a diversion team, along with Vex and 7 others in various stages of transformation. We would stage an attack on one of the primary manufactorum levels, drawing Skitarii forces away from their methodical sweep of the underhive. It was a suicide mission, though that term held little meaning to beings who saw death merely as reabsorption into the greater whole of the brood. As we prepared to ascend from the depths, gathering weapons scavenged from fallen Forge World personnel, I felt the human part of me stirring once more, not in horror at what I had become, but in recognition of an opportunity. If I could somehow break free of the broodmind's control, even momentarily, I might be able to guide the Skitarii to the beacon chamber. To end this before it was too late. But the thought was immediately detected, my connection to the broodmind making any form of deception almost impossible. Vex turned to me, her faceted eyes unreadable, but her psychic presence cold with suspicion. "The human part of you still resists," she said, her words distorted by her mutated mouth. "It will pass. With each hour, what you were diminishes. What you are becoming grows stronger." "I know," I replied, forcing the hybrid part of me to take control, to project the proper submission to the broodmind's will. "It is of no consequence." She studied me a moment longer, then turned away, apparently satisfied. But I felt a subtle change in the psychic network surrounding me. The broodmind was watching more closely now, ready to detect any further sign of rebellion. My chance, if it had ever truly existed, was gone. We moved upward through maintenance shafts and forgotten access tunnels, avoiding the main routes where Skitarii patrols would be heaviest. The manufactorum level we were targeting was a munitions production facility where workers assembled bolter shells and las packs for distribution to Imperial Guard regiments throughout the sector. The symbolic value of such a target would ensure a rapid and overwhelming Skitarii response, drawing forces away from the Underhive and giving other broodkin time to better conceal the beacon chamber. As we neared the upper levels, I began to notice changes in my perception. Sounds became sharper, colors more vivid. Scents carried information they never had when I was human, chemical signatures that told me about the emotional states and species of beings who had passed through these areas. My muscles felt taut with energy, ready to explode into action with a speed no unmodified human could match. The transformation was accelerating. Whatever temporary control the human part of me might have exerted was fading rapidly. Soon, there would be nothing left of Arven Creel but memories, absorbed and retained by the hybrid creature that had replaced him. We reached the access point to the manufactorum level, a maintenance hatch that opened onto a secondary storage area for component parts. I could smell the humans beyond, dozens of them, their scents rich, with the chemical markers of fatigue, stress, and the metallic taint of the materials they worked with. Beneath those scents, the richness of blood and tissue, biomass that could feed the brood. The hunger rose in me, sudden and overwhelming, not the dull ache of human hunger, but something primal and consuming, a need that went beyond sustenance to become the central purpose of existence. I wanted to tear through that hatch, to fall upon the unsuspecting workers, to feed and feed until the hunger was momentarily sated. Only the iron control of the broodmind held me back, reminding me of our actual purpose. On my signal, whispered the most transformed of our group, a creature that had once been a shift supervisor named Thule. "Remember the plan. Maximum chaos, maximum visibility. Draw their attention fully before allowing yourselves to be driven back towards Sector 17, away from the beacon chamber." We all nodded, the coordination of the broodmind making verbal confirmation unnecessary. I flexed my hands, watching as the fingers elongated further, the skin hardening into chitin, the nails extending into razor-sharp claws. The changes could be controlled to some extent, held back when concealment was necessary, accelerated when combat was imminent. Another gift from the Genestealer genetics that now dominated my cellular structure. Thula gave the signal, a psychic pulse that resonated through the broodmind. As one, we burst through the maintenance hatch into the storage area beyond. The workers there, 2 men checking inventory on component shelving, had no time to react before we were upon them. I took the nearest, my claws opening his throat in a spray of arterial blood that triggered an almost ecstatic response in my altered nervous system. The scent, the warmth, The vitality of it sent shivers of pleasure through me. The hunger demanded that I feed, but the mission parameters overrode that instinct. We needed to be seen, to cause alarm, to draw the Rhenxus. Skitarii. Feeding could come later, if any of us survived. We burst from the storage area into the main manufactorum floor. Dozens of workers looked up from their assembly stations, expressions shifting from surprise to horror as they beheld our transformed state. For a moment, there was absolute silence, as if reality itself paused to acknowledge the wrongness of our existence in this ordered, human space. Then the screaming began. Workers fled in all directions, some making for the main exits, others hiding beneath workstations or behind machinery. A few, braver or more foolish than the rest, grabbed tools as improvised weapons and moved to confront us. They died first, their courage no match for the speed and strength our transformations had granted us. The alarm klaxons began to wail, the sound piercing even to unmodified human ears, agonizing to our enhanced senses. But we endured it, continuing our rampage across the manufactorum floor. We did not kill indiscriminately, that would have been inefficient. Instead, we focused on causing maximum visible damage, tearing apart workstations, rupturing promethium lines, sending machinery crashing to the floor in showers of sparks and twisted metal. Skitarii responding, Vex called out, her enhanced senses detecting the approach of our true targets. 30 seconds. We continued our destruction until the last possible moment, ensuring that the scale of our attack would demand a significant response force. Then, as planned, we began our fighting retreat, moving back toward the maintenance access points that would lead us to Sector 17, drawing the Skitarii away from the beacon chamber. The first Skitarii entered the manufactorum with the mechanical precision for which they were known. No hesitation, no caution, simply an immediate assessment of the threat and appropriate response. Las fire cut through the air, striking one of our number with unerring accuracy. The hybrid fell, its torso cored by the high-powered beam, its connection to the broodmine snuffed out instantly. We returned fire with scavenged weapons, more to maintain the illusion of resistance than with any real hope of harming the Skitarii through their armored environmental suits. Their augmetic targeting systems gave them an accuracy no unmodified human could hope to match, and their weapons were designed to deal with threats far more dangerous than partially transformed hybrids. Another of our group fell, then a third. We accelerated our retreat, drawing the Skitarii after us into the maintenance tunnels. The confined space would work to our advantage, limiting the number of Skitarii who could bring their weapons to bear at any one time. It would not save us, but it would extend the chase, keeping them occupied for longer. I was the last to enter the tunnels, pausing at the entrance to fire a final burst from my scavenged autopistol, more for effect than with any expectation of causing harm. As I turned to follow my broodkin, a last beam caught me in the shoulder, spinning me around and slamming me against the tunnel wall. The pain was intense but strangely distant, my altered physiology already working to minimize the damage and begin repairs. I staggered after the others, the scent of my own burned flesh filling my nostrils. Behind us, I could hear the mechanical precision of the Skitarii advance, neither hurried nor cautious, simply implacable. The sound of their augmetic limbs striking the metal floor created a rhythm like a mechanical heartbeat, the tempo of death approaching with mathematical certainty. We fled deeper into the maintenance tunnels, taking turns and junctions seemingly at random, but actually following a path laid out in the broodmind. The goal was not to escape, which would have been impossible, but to lead the Skitarii on a lengthy pursuit through the most convoluted and difficult to navigate sections of the underhive, keeping them occupied for as long as possible. Another of our number fell, caught by a last beam as she rounded a corner too slowly. The momentary flash of her pain through the broodmind was followed by the cold emptiness of disconnection. 5 of us remained now, out of the original 9. We were accomplishing our purpose, but the cost was high. Section 23 ahead. Vex gasped, her voice distorted by the accelerating changes to her vocal apparatus. Ambush point. We had prepared for this operation with the meticulous planning that was the hallmark of the broodmind. Section 23 was a junction chamber where maintenance tunnels from 3 different levels intersected. Some of our broodkin had rigged the chamber with improvised explosives, salvaged from the manufactorum levels and repurposed. Not enough to seriously harm the Skitarii, but sufficient to slow them down, to add precious minutes to our diversion. We burst into the junction chamber and took up positions on the far side, weapons trained on the tunnel from which the Skitarii would emerge. Thule activated the detonator, a crude device cobbled together from salvaged tech. Nothing happened. The explosives had failed, or perhaps been discovered and neutralized by an advanced team of servitors. Our carefully planned ambush was now simply another killing ground, with us as the targets rather than the Skitarii. "Fall back," Thule ordered, both verbally and through the broodmind. Secondary route, but it was too late. The Skitarii appeared at the tunnel entrance, their weapons already firing with the perfect accuracy of machine-guided targeting. Thule went down first, multiple las beams converging on his center mass, burning through chitin and flesh alike. The most transformed of us, he had presented the most obvious target, Vex and another hybrid, a former dock worker like myself whose name I had never learned, tried to provide covering fire as the remaining 2 of us retreated toward one of the other tunnel entrances. The former dock worker died almost immediately, his head vaporized by a precision shot. Vex lasted longer, her partially transformed state granting her reflexes fast enough to dodge the first volley of las fire, but there was nowhere to take cover in the exposed junction chamber. The second volley caught her as she tried to leap to safety, las beams cutting through her legs and lower torso. She fell in a heap of twitching limbs, still alive, still connected to the broodmind, her pain, a screaming presence in our shared consciousness. I hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and the pull of kinship with Vex. That moment of indecision nearly cost me my life, as a las beam scorched past my head, close enough that I could smell my hair burning. The surviving hybrid grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the tunnel entrance with strength no human could possess. "She is already dead," he hissed, speaking of Vex. "The mission continues." He was right. I could feel Vex's presence in the broodmind fading, her life bleeding out onto the metal decking of the junction chamber. The Skitarii would grant her no mercy, would not waste a clean execution shot on a Xenos abomination. They would let her die slowly, or perhaps take her still-living body for examination by the biologist tech priests, a fate worse than any death. We fled down the secondary tunnel, the sounds of the Skitarii pursuit following close behind. Our diversion was working, drawing them away from the beacon chamber, but the cost had been higher than anticipated. Only 2 of us remained from the original 9, and the Skitarii showed no signs of abandoning the chase. "We need to split up," my companion said as we reached another junction. "Double their problem." I nodded, understanding the logic. 2 targets moving in different directions would force the Skitarii to either divide their forces, reducing their effectiveness, or choose to follow only one of us, allowing the other to potentially escape and continue the diversion elsewhere. "Section 32, he said, indicating the right-hand tunnel. "I will take Section 29. He gestured to the left. We clasped forearms briefly, a gesture that felt strangely human despite our transformed state. Then we parted, each running down our chosen tunnel without looking back. I felt his presence in the broodmind growing more distant as the physical distance between us increased, but the connection remained, a subtle awareness of his continued existence. I ran with a speed and endurance no human could have matched, my transformed physiology allowing me to maintain a pace that would have exhausted an unmodified human within minutes. The maintenance tunnel twisted and turned, descending deeper into the underhive. I recognized my surroundings from the collective knowledge of the broodmind, a mental map formed from the experiences of countless broodkin who had traversed these passages before me. Section 32 was a water reclamation facility, long abandoned after the aquifer it had once tapped ran dry. The vast chamber, with its network of pipes and filtration systems, would provide ample hiding places and multiple escape routes. If I could reach it before the Skitarii caught up, I might be able to lose them in the labyrinthine interior, extending the chase for hours. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in the broodmind, then the cold emptiness of disconnection. My companion had been found and eliminated. The Skitarii had either split their forces successfully, or more likely, had chosen his trail to follow rather than mine. Either way, he was gone, and I was now the sole survivor of our diversion team. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my muscles and the throbbing pain from my last wounded shoulder. The entrance to Section 32 lay just ahead, a heavy pressure door designed to contain potential flooding in the event of a catastrophic system failure. It stood partially open, jammed by accumulated debris from centuries of neglect. I squeezed through the gap, the edges of the door scraping against my hardened skin. Beyond lay the reclamation facility, vast and echoing, its ceiling lost in darkness overhead. Ancient filtration tanks stood in rows like silent sentinels, their surfaces thick with the dust of centuries. Pipes of various sizes crisscrossed the space, some large enough for a human to walk through upright, others barely wide enough to crawl through. The perfect environment for an extended game of hide-and-seek with the Skitarii. But as I paused to catch my breath and consider my next move, I became aware of a change in the broodmind, a shift in the collective awareness, a new current of emotion flowing through the psychic network. Alarm, urgency. The Skitarii had altered their pattern. While some continued to pursue me and other diversion teams, a significant force had changed direction, heading directly for the beacon chamber. Somehow, they had discovered its location. The knowledge hit me with the force of a physical blow. Our sacrifice was to be for nothing. The beacon would be destroyed before the Hive fleet could reach us. The Great Devourer would pass this world by, never knowing how close its children had come to preparing the way. The human part of me, the fragment that remained of Arven Creel, felt a surge of hope at this development. The Forge world might be saved. Billions of lives might be spared the horror of consumption by the Tyrannid swarm, but that fragment was now so small, so insignificant compared to the hybrid nature that had overtaken me. The dominant part of my consciousness felt only despair and a desperate need to prevent this outcome. New orders pulsed through the broodmind. All diversion operations were to be abandoned. All surviving broodkin were to converge on the beacon chamber to defend it against the Skitarii assault. It would be a last stand, with little hope of success against the superior weapons and tactical efficiency of the Mechanicus forces. But there was no alternative. The beacon must be protected at all costs. I turned away from my planned hiding place and made for one of the maintenance access points that would lead me back toward the deepest levels of the Underhive. The Skitarii pursuing me would likely continue their search of Section 32 for some time before realizing I had doubled back, giving me a head start on the journey to the beacon chamber. As I ran through the twisting tunnels, I felt the broodmind's awareness narrowing, focusing. Broodkin from across the Underhive were converging on a single point, their individual identities subsumed into a collective purpose. The Patriarch was calling us to war, to sacrifice, to martyrdom in service of the Great Devourer. I ran until my lungs burned and my muscles screamed for rest, driven beyond normal endurance by the hybrid vigor that now filled my transformed body. Other broodkin joined me as I neared the beacon chamber, emerging from side tunnels and access shafts, all drawn by the same psychic summons. None spoke, none needed to. The broodmind united us in purpose more perfectly than words ever could. We arrived at the outer perimeter of the beacon chamber to find preparations for defense already well underway. The more transformed hybrids, with their superior strength and natural weapons, had torn free sections of decking and bulkheads to create barricades across the main approach tunnels. Others had positioned themselves on elevated platforms and maintenance gantries, improvised weapons at the ready. The newest converts, those still mostly human in appearance, were being equipped with whatever firearms had been scavenged from fallen Forge World personnel. At the center of the chamber, the beacon itself pulsed with psychic energy, its rhythm noticeably quicker than before. The Patriarch stood beside it, its massive form even more transformed than when I had last seen it. The connection to the greater Tyranid consciousness had accelerated its evolution, pushing it closer to the pure Genestealer form from which all hybrids ultimately descended. It moved with terrible grace among the defenders, touching each briefly, reinforcing the psychic bond that united us all. When it reached me, its clawed hand rested on my head as it had during our first meeting. But this time, instead of visions of the future, I received something else. A command, a purpose, a final role to play in the grand design of the broodmind. I was to be part of the inner defense line, one of the last barriers between the Skitarii and the beacon itself. Not because of any special skill or strength I possessed, but because my transformation had reached a particular stage, balanced between human and hybrid, that made me suitable for a specific task. If the outer defenses failed, if the Skitarii breached the chamber, I and others like me would trigger a catastrophic overload in the beacon. The resulting psychic shockwave would be powerful enough to reach the approaching hive fleet, even if the beacon itself was destroyed in the process. It would be a death signal rather than a continuous call, but it might be enough to guide the great devourer to this world. The plan meant certain death for all within the chamber, including the Patriarch itself. But individual survival meant nothing in service to the broodmind. We were cells in a greater organism, expendable in defense of the whole. I took my position near the beacon, along with 5 other hybrids in a similar stage of transformation. We were connected directly to the beacon's control mechanisms, both physically through bioelectric interfaces grafted onto our flesh, and psychically through our link to the broodmind. At the proper moment, we would channel our own life energy into the beacon, causing it to discharge its accumulated psychic power in a single, massive burst. The first warnings of the Skitari approach came through the broodmind, a ripple of alarm from the outermost sentries. The Mechanicus forces were advancing with their usual methodical precision, servitor scouts preceding the main force to map the terrain and identify defensive positions. Our ambushes claimed several of these scouts, but not enough to significantly slow the advance or prevent the intelligence they gathered from reaching the Skitarii commanders. The first proper engagement came at the outermost barricade, a hastily constructed barrier of twisted metal and debris blocking one of the main approach tunnels. The broodkin positioned there, mostly newer converts with a few more transformed hybrids for close combat capability, put up a fierce resistance. But against the superior weaponry and tactical programming of the Skitarii, they were fighting a losing battle from the start. I felt each death as a small, cold silence in the broodmind, the psychic network losing nodes one by one. The outer barricade fell within 20 minutes of the first contact. The second lasted barely 15. The Skitarii were advancing with implacable determination, their casualties significant but sustainable, their progress slowed but not stopped by our desperate defense. As they drew closer to the beacon chamber, the Patriarch's presence in the broodmind grew more dominant, its will subsuming the individual consciousness of the defenders. We became extensions of its purpose, our actions guided by its strategic vision rather than our own limited perspectives. The fear and doubt that might have affected individual fighters was replaced by the cold certainty of the collective. The third and final outer barricade fell after 30 minutes of intense fighting. The Skitarii now stood at the entrance to the beacon chamber itself, their forces somewhat diminished by the running battle through the underhive, but still more than sufficient to overwhelm the remaining defenders. They paused briefly, perhaps to receive new tactical instructions from their tech priest controllers or to allow their weapon systems to cool after the sustained combat. In that moment of respite, I felt the Patriarch's attention focus specifically on me and the other hybrids connected to the beacon. A complex series of instructions flowed through the broodmind, too intricate to be expressed in human language. We were to wait until the Skitarii had fully committed to their assault on the chamber, until their forces were concentrated within the blast radius of the beacon's overload. Only then were we to trigger the catastrophic discharge that would be our final service to the brood. The Skitarii assault, when it came, was overwhelming in its intensity and precision. They breached the chamber entrance with shaped charges that sent shrapnel tearing through the ranks of the defenders. Then they advanced in fire teams, each unit covering the others as they leapfrogged forward, las weapons cutting down any broodkin who presented a target. The Patriarch itself led the defense, its massive form charging directly into the Skitarii formation, claws tearing through their armored environmental suits as though they were paper. For a brief moment, it seemed as though its sheer physical power might turn the tide of battle. 3 Skitarii went down in as many seconds, their augmetic limbs and organic components alike shredded by the Patriarch's frenzied attack. Then the Skitarii adjusted their tactics, bringing their heavier weapons to bear. A plasma gun discharged, the superheated matter striking the Patriarch in the center of its mass. Chitin blackened and cracked under the intense heat, flesh beneath vaporizing instantly. The Patriarch staggered but did not fall, its vitality far beyond that of a normal organism. A second plasma blast followed, then a third, each causing catastrophic damage to the Patriarch's form. Through the broodmind, I felt its pain as though it were my own, a searing agony that threatened to overwhelm my consciousness. But beneath the pain was an iron purpose, a final command, being transmitted to me and the other hybrids connected to the beacon. The time had come. The Skitarii were fully committed to the assault, their forces concentrated within the chamber. We were to trigger the overload now, while the beacon still functioned, and the psychic network remained intact enough to channel our collective energy. I reached for the bioelectric interface grafted to my flesh, my transformed fingers closing around the organic material that connected me directly to the beacon's control systems. The other hybrids did the same, our actions perfectly synchronized through the broodmind. Together, we began to channel our life energy into the beacon, feeling our own vitality draining away as the psychic capacitors charged beyond their safe operational parameters. The Patriarch, despite its grievous wounds, fought on with redoubled fury, seeking to buy us the few seconds necessary to complete the overload sequence. It tore through another Skitarii fire team before a sustained barrage of las fire finally brought it down, its massive form collapsing amidst the carnage it had created. Its physical death did not immediately silence its presence in the broodmind. Its psychic essence lingered, continuing to coordinate the remaining defenders and maintain the connection between the hybrids and the beacon. I felt my consciousness beginning to fade as more and more of my life energy transferred to the beacon. The process was irreversible now, a one-way journey toward oblivion, but there was no fear, no regret. The hybrid part of me felt only satisfaction at fulfilling my purpose in service to the broodmind, and the human part, what little remained of Arven Creel, felt a strange sort of peace. An end to the horror my existence had become. An end to the hunger that had consumed me. An end to the knowledge of what I had done in service to an alien will. The beacon's pulsing quickened, becoming erratic as the overload approached critical levels. Energy coursed through the hybrid systems, organic components rupturing under the strain, mechanical parts glowing with excess power. The air itself seemed to thicken, reality distorting under the pressure of the psychic energy being channeled. The Skitarii, recognizing the imminent catastrophe, began a fighting withdrawal from the chamber. But it was too late. The chain reaction had begun, the energy cascade building toward an explosive release that nothing could prevent. The last thing I saw before my organic vision failed was the beacon itself, pulsing with a light that seemed to bleed from the visible spectrum into something else, something that hurt the mind to perceive. Then came the detonation, a soundless explosion of pure psychic energy that tore through physical and mental barriers alike. I felt my physical form disintegrating, molecules separating under forces never meant to exist in the material universe. But my consciousness, bound to the broodmind, persisted for a fraction of a second longer, long enough to feel the psychic shockwave expanding outward, not just through the underhive but beyond, into the void, carrying with it the final desperate call of the brood to its masters. The signal reached the approaching hive fleet, a death cry that contained within it all the information the Tyrannid Collective needed. The location of Forge World Helios Secundus, its defenses and vulnerabilities, the biomass it represented, ripe for harvesting. The signal was received, acknowledged. The great devourer adjusted its course, accelerated its advance. They would come, not in a solar year as originally estimated, but within months, too soon for the Forge world to prepare adequate defenses. Too soon for evacuation, even if the Mechanicus were willing to abandon such a valuable industrial asset, which they would not be. The sacrifice of the brood had not been in vain. The feast would proceed as planned. As my consciousness finally dissolved, the last fragment of what had once been, Arven Creel felt a moment of purest horror at what we had accomplished, at the doom we had ensured for this world and all who dwelled upon it. But that horror was swallowed by the vastness of the brood mind, a single discordant note drowned in a symphony of alien purpose. My last thought, before even the brood mind released its hold on what remained of my being, was a question without an answer. Had there ever truly been an Arven Creel, or had I always been just a vessel waiting to be filled with the will of the great devourer? Then nothing, silence, darkness, peace. But the story of Forge World Helios Secundus was far from over. 3 standard months after the destruction of the beacon chamber, the first tendrils of Hive Fleet Kraken entered the system. By then, the Mechanicus had purged the underhive of all Genestealer presence, exterminating not just the hybrids but thousands of uninfected human workers as well, deemed to be potential contamination risks. The Forge world's defenses had been bolstered, its orbital batteries upgraded, its Skitarii legions reinforced from other Forge worlds in the sector. None of it would be enough. The great devourer had heard the call of its children, and it had come to feast. The first wave of mycetic spores breached the planetary defense grid with minimal losses, delivering tyrannid organisms directly to the surface. The harvest of Forge World Helios Secundus had begun, a process that would continue until every scrap of biomass had been consumed, until the once vital industrial world was reduced to a barren, airless rock, useful only for the trace minerals that might be extracted from its corpse. And somewhere in the vast, distributed consciousness that was the hive mind, a fragment of memory remained, the experiences of a brood that had prepared the way, the life and death of a hybrid that had once been a dockworker named Arven Creel. Data points in the endless calculation of consumption that drove the great devourer in its eternal hunger. In the Imperium's official records, Forge World Helios Secundus would be listed as lost to Xenos infestation, a footnote in the endless chronicle of humanity's struggle for survival in a galaxy of horrors. Few would remember its name. Fewer still would know the truth of how it fell, of how the enemy came from within before it came from the stars. But I remember, for I am the brood mind, and the brood mind is me. I am the hunger that never ceases. I am the patient infiltrator. I am the beacon that calls the great devourer to feast. And I am coming for your world next.